This video is brought to you by Helix Sleep. When I was a teenager, I hated Moral Orel with all of my heart. I remember when it first premiered on Adult Swim back in the mid-2000s, and how I thought it was this disgusting, shocking, cynical comedy. This satirical Leave It to Beaver family in a white picket town with tacky claymation and an axe to grind against Christianity. That it was only made to attack and insult people of the faith, which around that time included yours truly. For the folks who don't know, I was raised as a Baptist, and I went to a Christian private school from the 5th grade to my graduating year in high school. Admittedly, I was not a Bible thumper who would scream at people walking by about the flames of hell, but I took what I was told to heart as far as the love of Jesus goes. So to see such an irreverent show take pot shots at my faith in such an extreme way, well, let's just say I preferred Family Guy and Boondocks a bit more. And apparently, so did the majority of other Adult Swim viewers. So much so that Moral Orel would eventually be canceled. For teenage me, I said good riddance and bring on more Family Guy. At the time of recording this video, it has been nearly 14 years since Moral Orel was concluded on Adult Swim outside of the special, and I have changed profoundly as a person over that period of time. Life happens. And I discovered that experience is the greatest teacher of all. I learned that the world and the people in it are much more complicated than teenage me could ever comprehend. And that said people, both good and bad, come from all walks of life. I gained perspective. And with it, my beliefs and outlook shifted to be more open-minded. So, instead of just watching Family Guy, I'm watching Rick and Morty, baby! But yeah, teenage me was completely wrong about Moral Orel, and I realize now that the show was a trailblazer for adult animation with incredibly deep and thought-provoking stories, themes, and characters. In hindsight, it was one of the best series to ever air on Adult Swim, which is ironic since it was essentially canceled for treading such a daring path. A path that, according to sources, Adult Swim deliberately requested, but then immediately regretted. Allegedly, they asked the creators of Moral Orel to get even darker with its stories as the series progressed from season 2 to 3. And yeah, let's just say the folks behind Moral Orel kindly obliged. So much so that it was preemptively canceled just for following orders, which is wild to me. Adult Swim asked for darker content and then punished the show for doing so, which is a massive betrayal to Moral Orel as far as I'm concerned. Also, Adult Swim is no stranger to edgy content. So what exactly did Moral Orel do to make even Adult Swim go, yeah, this is too much, we're done here?
I'm sorry I goofed up. I was just trying to be good, so you could love me more than you do now.
Oh, Orel, I could never love you more. People only have a certain amount of love in them, and I'm afraid I have to divide mine up between at least a dozen people.
And that through your weaknesses you built up a poison that poisoned others around you. That you loved.
Now you might be asking yourself right now, why did Saber even rewatch a series he originally hated so much? Well, for 2 reasons. Number 1, a friend of mine discovered that I never gave the show a fair chance as a teen and begged me to give it another shot as an adult. And then number 2, there are a surprising amount of people who love this show, which is reflected in its overall rating. So naturally, adult me began to question if teenage me was far too hasty in his judgment and lacked the proper perspective to genuinely understand such an irreverent show. That maybe, just maybe, teenage me did not know what he was talking about. I also wanted to find out specifically why it was canceled. What line did this already incredibly dark and depressing show cross that led to it getting canned? How can you possibly get darker than the stuff in season 1? Well, I found out. And let's just say, it's a lot, but in a very authentic and mature way. So, in this video, we're going to look back on Moral Orel, how it came to be, what it was trying to do and say, why exactly Adult Swim canceled it, and why my previous opinion about this series pulled a 180. How this show, if anything, is deceptively deep and actually paved the way for adult animation as we currently know it. So, let's begin our dark descent into the surprisingly endearing world of Moral Orel and how Adult Swim threw it under the bus.
Orel.
Look out! But real quick, before we start, ad time. So a big shout out to this video sponsor, Helix Sleep. I've had my bed from Helix for like 2 years now, and my rest just improves. It just keeps getting better, getting some of the best sleep of my life. You know, what I do is I walk in at night, look at the bed, I'm like, oh, hey you. I'm gonna pump on top of you. P-O-M-F, pump. That's the sound I make when I hit the bed. Pfft. That's a different sound, actually. I make both sounds. So for those who don't know, Helix Sleep makes premium mattresses and bedding that are customized to fit your needs and conveniently shipped right to your door. It all starts with the Helix Sleep Quiz. Everybody's different, and Helix knows that. So they made a sleep quiz that matches your unique body type and sleep preferences to the perfect mattress for you. Do you sleep on your side, on your tummy, on your back, on the ceiling? We're gonna find some vampires in here. Do you want your mattress to be soft or firm? For me, I sleep on my side. I also like a mattress that is firm, but not like too firm, so kind of soft. A hybrid, if you will. Also, I wanted a bed that was big enough for me and all of the pets of my house. Because like I want to stretch out, and the kitty, she sits on the corner, just you know how it goes. Based on those preferences, the quiz suggested the Midnight Helix Luxe in queen size. And folks, I love it. It's been a perfect fit since day one. And for those of you who share a bed with a partner, see now you're just bragging, you can have them take the quiz alongside you. So both of you can find that perfect compromise. Also, like I said earlier, the mattress is shipped right to your front door with free shipping in the US. It's rolled up in a box and is very easy to set up. Unless you're me, because I'm dumb, and I opened the box in a room that couldn't facilitate it, so I got pinned against the wall. And if you're hesitant about buying a Helix you haven't been able to try, no worries. There's a 100-night sleep trial, so you have over 3 months to try out your selection and make sure that you love it. If you don't, Helix will pick up the mattress and you'll get a full refund. Helix also has a 10-year warranty, and they also offer financing options and flexible payment plans. So a great night of sleep is never far away. So I absolutely recommend Helix Sleep. I love my Helix, and I think you will too. If you're looking for a new bed, check out Helix. Click the link down below or go to helixsleep.com/Saberspark and get up to $200 off your Helix mattress plus 2 pillows for free. And now, back to Moral Orel. So, who's responsible for the unapologetic force of nature that is Moral Orel? Well, that would be Dino, oh god, your last name, Stamatopoulos. That's right, Dino Stamatopoulos. You know, Starburns from Community. Along with Dino was Scott Adsit, aka Hornberger from 30 Rock, and then Jay Johnston. Actually, there's a wonderful behind-the-scenes special where Dino and his team share about the creation and production of Moral Orel.
So I wrote this script for Iggy Pop, and it was just called Iggy, and he played a 12-year-old kid, and I kind of modeled it after Leave It to Beaver.
Oh, I'm gonna go use it right now.
Good boy, son. Good boy.
Do.
I sat with it for 10 years. I was actually on a comedy website, on a message board, talking to all my fans, which is like, I don't know, 6, 7 people. One of them suggested, why not make a cartoon out of it? The whole climate of America at the time was, very religious, and I'm just trying to be funny. I'm not trying to change the world here, unless I'm talking to you now and the world has changed because of Moral Orel.
3 seasons long with 43 episodes in total, and also a special on top of that. One would think that Moral Orel would be a perfect fit for Adult Swim's mid-2000s lineup, which included stuff like Family Guy, Boondocks, Aqua Teen, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, and Robot Chicken. I mean, Robot Chicken is stop motion, which means Moral Orel will kind of be like the same, right? Right? The companies behind Moral Orel include Fragical Productions, Shadow Machine, and of course, William Street. And the series would run from 2005 to 2008. though there would be some complications with the airing of the show. For example, the first episode of Moral Orel to premiere was, oddly enough, its first season's finale. Why? Because it was a Christmas-themed episode, and Adult Swim wanted to release the episode as part of its festive programming block in December, which, from a narrative point of view, is extremely stupid. The last episode of the first season is a game changer, so it definitely messes with the overall flow of the season. Viewers were confused and were like, why did the first episode of this show have a cliffhanger? And yeah, I can see where they're coming from. That's some pretty heavy stuff. And of course, as is tradition, the FCC was not happy with Moral Orel, and some of the episodes were stuck in approval limbo. It's great because there's a character who's obsessed with burning books, censoring things, and picketing over the most benign of offenses. And what's her name? Frances Clara Censordoll. The voice acting was great. The animation, well done. A lot of love and care went into the creation of this show. Now, many people believe it was initially a satirical version of the Lutheran show Davy and Goliath. But as Dino said, that was not the original inspiration. According to Dino, quote, "When I wrote the pilot for Moral Orel, it wasn't going to be stop motion. I thought because of the Bush administration and everything happening at the time, I could take this script I already wrote about a sort of Leave It to Beaver kid and just add Christianity to it. And maybe we could do it with marionette puppets." Now, personally, I can see the inspiration Moral Orel took from Davy and Goliath after moving forward with stop-motion animation. But that was never the original core concept or inspiration. More of a byproduct, if anything. Now, something interesting I found was this interview with Scott Adsit about how his sister, who is a non-Bible thumping Christian, watched the show and it led to them having a fight. That Scott argued that the show wasn't about ripping on Christians, but on another theme entirely, which we'll discuss here later in the video. Ultimately, the two buried the hatchet, but it led to Scott quitting the show. That he, quote, "My family is more important than the show." And that he said, "So I told her I'd quit, and I went in the next day, and I quit. And Dino and Nick tried to convince me not to. And I said, this is family over the show, obviously. I mean, otherwise, what are we learning from the show? The show is about how important family should be, and how it's mistreated. So I had to go." End quote. Seems that Moral Orel was ready to make some waves right out the gate, and would continue to press the envelope for the duration of its run. A run that Adult Swim would eventually regret.
Things that are like weights around your head. You sit there for the rest of your life with nowhere to go and no one to be.
So what is Moral Orel about? There really is no simple answer, especially with how much it shifts throughout its run. But at its core, it's about Orel Puppington, a bright-eyed, naive, 12-year-old boy who loves God and church with all of his heart. He lives in the town of Morrilton, State Soda, smack dab in the center of the Bible Belt of America. And he shares his home with his ill-behaved, screaming little brother, Shapey, his cleaning-obsessed and emotionally dismissive mother, Blaberta, and then his father, Clay. A man who has the outward appearance of a 1950s traditional father, but on the inside is cruel, cynical, and extremely abusive. He's a raging alcoholic who holds no love for his family, especially Orel, and seems to be on a mission to deliberately sabotage and mislead Orel at every turn when it comes to life lessons and growing as a person. Where Orel is the living embodiment of optimism, Clay is the antithesis to Orel and represents pessimism to a hateful degree.
Then, gradually, as we endure these hardships and accept them as normal, that's when we've finally earned the right to get drunk and be emotionally distant from our families.
Just like my father. I love you, Dad.
It can be argued that the town of Morrilton is just as important as the family itself, and includes a cast of extreme, eccentric, and damaged characters. Reverend Rod Putty, who's also voiced by Rigby from Regular Show, by the way. But Rod here is the pastor of the church, who seems indifferent to preaching, yet maintains closed-minded opinions. He's sexually repressed and resents his pastoral station. Doughy, the empty-headed best friend of Orel, who goes along with his misadventures. He acts as a voice of fear and concern, though said concern fades quickly as he usually willingly goes along with Orel's misguided chaos. And then there's Coach Stopframe, aka Danielle, an easygoing, hedonistic man who shares a lights-off gay relationship with Orel's father. Unlike the majority of the town, Danielle here is not Christian, yet he represents his own particular brand of awful. And folks, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I can do a video on its own that's just a dissection of each character in Moralton and how complex and rewarding they are. But just know that every one of them has layers to their characters. Initial appearances are deceiving, as I learned throughout my viewing of the show. Season 1 is 10 episodes long, each 11 minutes or so in length, and primarily focuses on Orel himself. The first season is largely formulaic. Orel starts in church, listening to a sermon, misunderstands the lesson attempting to be imparted, goes on to cause some sort of trouble in his genuine attempt to do the right thing in God's eyes, showing the flaws of Christian doctrine, only to be chastised by his father, to be spanked off screen, and for the final punchline of the show to reveal Clay having a moral twisted interpretation of the lesson than what would be obviously expected by the viewer. Also, his pants fall down. The show is content early on to comment on Christian hypocrisy at this shallow level for the majority of its first season, but it is not content to stay there. Once more, Orel is an impressionistic child completely devoted to the faith, being raised in a Protestant town all indoctrinated by Christian dogma. In each episode, the town or the family impart their beliefs onto a naive Orel. By doing so, he goes on to misinterpret their teachings, leading to juvenile, ridiculous punchlines, ranging from raising the dead, only to have the town object, not due to the literal zombie outbreak, but that the zombies themselves are naked. And that's unacceptable, right? Other episodes in Season 1 are just as outrageous. One plot has Orel inspired by charity, and he ends up giving his money to a drug dealer by mistake, who then gets him hooked on heavy drugs. Another episode is about Orel wanting to be a good husband in order to make his future wife happy. So what does he do? He ends up getting his junk pierced at a sex shop. Though we get to meet Stephanie there, and she's a fantastic character. Love her. And then the wildest one of all is God's chef. Brace yourself, all right? Here, Orel is caught pleasuring himself and is told that wasting his stuff is a sin, and that he should do said action only when creating a child. So what does Orel do? He does his thing in a piping bag, and then disperses his seed in unsuspecting sleeping women across town and causes this unwanted pregnancy outbreak. That's one way to put it, right? Yeah, this show does not hold its punches, and it is not for the faint of heart. Now, teenage me was turned off by this episode, and I'm sure that many people still maintain the same sentiment, and that's okay. Dark comedy, to this degree, can be very off-putting, and it's not for everyone. And guess what? During my rewatch for the series, I really did not like the first season. I thought maybe teenage me had good intuition after all, and I don't see why so many folks care for this show today. But all the while, there was this narrative undercurrent taking form despite the episodic approach of Season 1. While following Orel's misadventures, a far more interesting plot slowly begins to take form. Everyone in Moralton, to some degree or another, is a hypocrite. Despite everyone preaching a God-fearing lifestyle and harshly judging anyone who falls short of God's will, they are all slowly revealed to be indulging in their own vices that tend to be far darker and depraved than the average person, due to the repressed mask they're all forced to wear. From the broken family that Orel finds himself in the care of, to a pastor desperate for sex, to a homosexual gym teacher knee-deep in nihilistic hedonism. Everyone around Orel tries to impart on him standards they themselves can't live up to. In this regard, Moralton itself becomes a character, and a far more interesting one than Orel. who transforms from merely the catalyst for each episode's basic commentary on religion to a vessel that explores the psychological and sociological effects strict religious adherence can have on people. Season 1 ends with a crescendo, as the facade of a marriage between Orel's parents collapse. As hinted throughout the season, Orel's brother, Shapey, is not his biological sibling. It is actually the son of Coach Danielle, rather than Clay. Shown to be a stereotypical conservative father who doesn't show his emotions, in the finale, Clay finally breaks down and confronts his wife about her infidelity and leaves the family alone on Christmas. The episode ends with a slow pan of Orel standing outside the bar his father frequents, talking to God. That despite there only being 2 minutes left of Christmas, he has faith in God that it'll still be the best Christmas ever, only for the shot to linger in silence for a second before cutting to the credits. And it is this cut that cements the series' transformation from a late-night black comedy to something far more interesting. The second season begins exploring the citizens of Morrilton far more in depth, with Orel firmly cemented as the only truly uncompromising Christian in the town. His dynamic becomes one of confusion, as he desperately tries to reconcile the faith he holds dear with the reality of the people around him. The tone of the show starts to become far more dark, as the crude humor of Season 1 takes a firm back seat to spotlighting the demons of their own design everyone in Morrilton is dealing with. The season ends with a 2-parter called Nature, with Clay deciding to take Orel on a hunting trip, where Clay is truly shown to be an abusive, manipulative monster. Character traits and stereotypes in Clay that were presented as the butt of jokes in Season 1 are now suddenly all portrayed very seriously. And the psychological damage inherent in Clay and the abuse he's doing to Orel become very real and are no longer funny. The entire 2-parter feels like an emotional train wreck that you can't pry your eyes away from, as a supposedly grown adult straight up abuses a child in the privacy of the woods in a drunken stupor. And Orel loses all faith in his father as a role model, dejected and broken by the ordeal. Their relationship in the beginning of the 2-parter already felt more strained than normal, with the episode culminating with Clay accidentally shooting Orel. But he's too drunk to care, passing out and leaving Orel to fend for himself overnight. During the night, a bear shows up at their camp and tries to attack a still passed out Clay. And despite Orel having no desire to hunt, to kill, to hurt anything in nature, he shoots the bear multiple times, killing it to save his father's life. Clay then wakes up in the morning unaware. He demands to sleep longer and leaves Orel alone until late in the afternoon, when he wakes up and immediately assumes that Orel shot the bear and is excited that his son killed something. Orel takes a moment, looks from the gun in his hands to his father's expectant face, and lies, telling Clay that it was him that shot the bear. Despite the entirety of the last 2 seasons being largely about Orel trying to live up to God, part of that is being a good son to his parents. In this moment, any desire to try and respect his father and be a good son in his eyes dies. A harrowing and heavy end to a season already bursting with tragedy. In Season 3, the show goes full drama with episodes that aren't in chronological order to the events of the hunting accident. The season takes more time to explore the other characters of the town, and we truly see how broken they all are, with apparently one episode being the straw that broke the back for Adult Swim. The episode is called Alone, and it features 3 of the women of Morrilton and the respective trauma they carry. Nurse Bendy, who was introduced as this dumb blonde who was only prized for her body, is actually a broken and emotionally stunted woman who roleplays at her home as a wife for a normal family with her toys. On accident, her teddy husband falls on her from behind, and she has an emotional breakdown where she feels betrayed by her teddy husband, all the while crying, "Not you, not you." It's abundantly clear that she's a survivor of sexual assault, and she is tormented by her past. In the same apartment complex is Miss Sculptham, Orel's school teacher. She too is a survivor and has very complex emotions over the affair. From impressions, she longs for her abuser, yet she hates him. She allowed herself to be attacked, according to the episode, so that the attacker could be trapped and caught. There's newspaper clippings of the event plastered all over her apartment. And there's also a coat hanger that implies that she was impregnated by her attacker and that she had to do her own abortion. She's completely messed up over what happened and has conflicting emotions as a survivor. The episode took the time to discuss of the colossal damage that sexual offenders can exact on a victim and the hell that they have to suffer and carry afterwards. Folks, how often do we see that discussion represented so sincerely in adult animation? Especially back then. There was nothing funny about their stories, and it was played very straightforward as a drama, which at that point in More Orel, it was. From what I can tell from my research, this was one of the main episodes that led to the cancellation of More Orel, that it went too far, but I'll comment more on that here in a moment. At the end of Season 3, we dive into the marriage of Orel's parents, how Orel's mother longed for a husband who would listen to her, talk to her, need her, all things she was being denied in her own family before she met Clay. Clay himself, prior to meeting Blabberta, was actually straight-edged and did not drink. He was more put together. But for Blabberta, who had alcoholic tendencies, well, she willingly led Clay down a path of booze-ridden destruction, that he needed her, and the two brought out the worst in each other. We also learned earlier in the season that Coach Danielle impregnated Orel's mother with the ulterior motive of getting closer to Clay. Like he genuinely does not care about the kid, or Orel's mother for that matter, and only cared about selfishly shoehorning himself into Clay's life.
Well, you liked me once. What happened?
I needed to get closer.
To me?
No,
To him?
I'm sorry. Oh wait, no I'm not. I don't care.
In the final episode of Season 3, Orel finds himself in the presence of Coach Stopframe in order to learn how to honor his father, and the two share almost a father-son day of celebrating Christmas. Clay finds out and is furious that Orel's with Coach Danielle and drags the rest of the family to confront his gay lover, that he does love Danielle, and he eventually admits to this in front of everyone. Danielle says it's too late, and that whatever they had before is over. Orel learns, though, and accepts that his father is not an honorable man. But Danielle tells him that Clay did one thing that was honorable, and that was creating Orel. We then see a glimpse into the future where Orel is a well-adjusted adult and is celebrating Christmas with his family. It's also implied that his brother, and by proxy his stepbrother, which I haven't even mentioned that. Long story short, there's another family like Orel's, and they confused the two boys, and no one cared. The parents didn't care. Orel knew. He's like, Dad, that's not shapey. And eventually Orel's family has both sons, and both sons click and actually grow together and become more emotionally mature and better for each other. And both of those brothers become a police officer and a firefighter and are well-adjusted. Again, I'm so glad that the kids grew up, that the parents are miserable, that they're the ones in their own hell, but that the kids from that family were able to persevere and find peace. A powerful message that truly shows that the series itself was not out to get Christians, but hypocrites. The few moments that More Orel allows for healthy, positive outcomes for its characters are almost always from secular, genuine human connections that extend beyond the boundaries of the town's dogma. Reverend Putty goes from a bigoted, sex-obsessed husk to a slightly more well-adjusted character in higher spirits after reconnecting with his estranged daughter, Stephanie. By getting over his judgments of others, over their appearance by forming a genuine connection with his daughter, Putty begins moving his life in a more positive direction. Same thing for Joe, the school bully. He's tempered dramatically by reconnecting with his mother, Nurse Bendy, who he believed to be dead, and her own disposition improves, being able to have a connection with her actual son, rather than her manufactured copy of one. Combined with Orel's only healthy connections being with Christina and the series proper, and then his grandfather in the special, the show seems resolute in showing that it's a genuine relationship with other people, rather than an assumed deity that true salvation lies.
Like this?
No, like this. Bleh.
Christianity was not the enemy of this show, but it was a vessel to demonstrate the hypocrisy of people. According to show writer Scott Adsit, the show is about hypocrites, making fun of them and showing how devastating they can be to pure and trusting people like Orel. That in the wrong hands, hypocrisy can destroy people and prevent them from healing in any meaningful way. As someone who has a checkered past with his faith, this show was cathartic for me, because I completely agree with the sentiment of its message. Dogma of any variety can be downright devastating. Clay and Blaberta were not good people, and they knew it. But rather than facing their demons, they gladly doubled down on their destructive vices and beliefs, even at the cost of their family and themselves.
Because somewhere, way down deep inside, in its twisted catacombs and dank, dark hallways, there's an even scarier, more horribly monstrous entity.
What?
Truth.
As someone who has nervous breakdowns over his existential dread, this show was surprisingly comforting and endearing to me. That the human connection is important and is something we all share, but can also be warped in the wrong hands. Orel grew up to be a well-adjusted Christian with a good family. The lessons he learned from his grandfather about nature and asking questions and seeking measurable facts endure with his grandson, though it was initially a rocky start. Orel was able to break the chain of generational trauma after confronting his father, and even though he rightfully carries emotional baggage, he was able to rise to the occasion and maintain a healthy balance of faith along with objective clairvoyance. That is why he had a happy ending, and his parents did not. Pulling something off as nuanced as this is not easy, but in my opinion, Orel stuck the landing.
A miracle happens. A loving family. Just like that, out of nowhere. Now what causes this? A belief in God? A strong moral structure? Blind luck? Who knows? Who cares? You're not gonna get any answers out of me. I'm just a puppet for the big guy. I don't write this stuff. The end.
Now, unfortunately, despite the unique merit of Moral Orel, Adult Swim claimed it went too far, and the overall vision of Moral Orel was ruined as a result. According to my sources, the show was supposed to run for 5 seasons in total, and even rework the title to Moralton, to focus more on the town instead of just Orel. But Adult Swim ended the show prematurely during season 3. The show writers had completed scripts and stories, which apparently included an episode where Orel's teacher goes to prison to confront her attacker and find closure in regards to her sexual assault. But that never came to fruition. Adult Swim had enough and canceled the show due to it being far too depressing. According to an interview with Scott Adsit, Adult Swim's vice president at the time, Mike Lazo, initially praised the show, calling it, quote, a masterpiece of American humor and one of the best series in his life. But little over a year later, he canceled the show. Scott said, quote, he felt it was getting a little too soulful, a little too serious. I think the word he might have used is depressing. It was not just a silly little puppet show anymore. It was kind of naughty for the insomniatic potheads who were the target demographic. It was evolving into something a little more heartfelt. It was developing a soul, essentially, end quote. Scott also added that the grand vision of the show, if it remained uninterrupted, would have been the following, quote, over 5 seasons, to evolve these little puppets into the most realistic people on television. We were going to bring in Orel's grandfather, and he would have become a resident in the house, and kind of a different voice, because he was someone you'll see in the episode called Passing. By the way, that episode was never done. He's terminal, and it's Orel's dealing with the idea of death and afterlife, and a different voice, a voice of reason, because his father kind of gave up on God when his mother died, end quote. Again, the episode never happened, which really is a shame, because it sounded like they had some incredible stories in store. Apparently, Orel was intended to go on a journey during these canceled seasons with the trajectory of becoming a fully evolved human being. That, quote, we would take him on a journey from what he is in season 1 essentially, just kind of informed, self-aware, and skeptical, but happy. But then it would be his journey. And also, I guess that journey would then have an effect on his parents, and his brother, and his grandfather, and hopefully watch everybody change, because that's dynamic and more interesting. Well, for us anyway, end quote. It really is a shame that the full vision of Moral Orel could not be realized. That a show that was primarily about hypocrites was ironically told by Adult Swim, "You're doing great, keep it up," and then told, "Ooh, this is too dark, we're ending the show." Yeah, Adult Swim likes edgy humor, but once it gets serious, well, now you went too far. That Orel can have his empty-headed way with ladies of the town. But if we talk about the ladies themselves in a meaningful way that discusses the trauma of sexual assault, well, that's a bit of a bummer. What do you think this is? Toucan Birdie?
No, you cannot joke about that.
Yeah, that's not funny. That's not the kind of humor we do on this show.
Adult Swim truly did not realize the incredible show it had in its hands. And in the vein of keeping things lighthearted, killed it. And any potential it could have cultivated beyond season 3. Now, there was a special that followed in 2012 called Before Orel that showed Orel as a kid, well, younger, and the brief interactions he had with his concerned grandfather, the father of Clay. That Clay willingly picked the church to teach Orel because he did not like the questions Orel was asking him and preferred to hide behind Christian dogma. Also, he probably delighted that said Christian dogma was the opposite belief of his own father, a father who is an atheist and doesn't really believe in the church. Also, a father who beat Clay after the death of his overbearing mother. It really goes to show that generational family trauma is the gift that just keeps on giving. But in the right hands, and with the right circumstances, and with the right people, maybe the chain can be broken, and some semblance of a balanced life can be achieved. In conclusion, Moral Orel is one of the boldest adult animated series ever made, and it left an impact on me in a very profound way. What I thought was exclusively a lowbrow, shockingly offensive show at the expense of Christians was so much more. Slowly but surely, the series introduced these loose narrative threads with its characters, its stories, and world building. Threads that coalesce at the end as this tapestry of sobering pain and reality. People lie, they manipulate others, and they willingly choose to be miserable in their ignorance and self-loathing instead of facing any shred of truth. Not necessarily of God, but of themselves, and of how broken they truly are due to their own hypocrisy. It hurts how real this is, and how it hits very close to home for me and many others. I know secular and religious people alike who fall into this category. They know the damage they inflict on themselves and one another, that they are living a lie. But any path towards genuine progress would require them to look in the mirror and deeply reflect on their own shortcomings. For many people, they prefer keeping up a familiar yet miserable facade instead of any semblance of introspection, because accepting responsibility for their own lives and actions is downright terrifying. Again, this show stuck with me after my rewatch and stayed on my mind for weeks. Hell, I'm still thinking about it, and that rarely happens for me. Usually I finish a show and move on to something else. But the stories, themes, and message for Moral Orel resonates with me on a very personal level. It's wild how I went from hating this show as a teenager, and now I love it as an adult. I suppose experiencing life, going through hardships, and gaining perspective can profoundly change a person and provide a much-needed lens to view the world in a different light. Not one necessarily stripped of religion, but being cautious of people who might take advantage of you. As a teen and young adult, I was terrified at the notion of challenging my faith. That such a topic was beyond reproach, and to question it was to question reality itself. Now, I know as an adult that it's okay to ask questions, especially if they're in the vein of seeking well-meaning truth and transparency. And I think Moral Orel nails that message exceptionally well. Once more, despite the heavy-handed tone of the first season and portions of the second, Moral Orel does not exist just to hate on Christians and their beliefs. It exists to challenge anyone of any walk of life who finds themselves in a situation where people in power say one thing but do another, and they don't have your best interest at heart. That it can happen at the church, at school, at work, with friends, with family, anywhere, and anybody, because hypocrisy knows no bounds and will take a naive soul for the ride of its life and warp that soul on a permanent level. Now, there's no denying that this caliber of content is not for everyone, though I personally believe that the core message of the show is extremely important and valid. The creators of More Orel were risk takers and took a leap of faith with the initial introduction and progression of their show. Season 1 was outrageous and shocking, yet it paved the way to build up to something greater down the road. That this show could pivot from being an episodic dark comedy to a sincere drama about the hardships people carry from their upbringings, the unresolved trauma they shoulder, and how they willingly share that suffering with their loved ones for selfish motives. It was a very bold approach, and it risked alienating audiences with such tonal whiplash. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happened. As a teenager, I did not care for the first season, which is arguably the most digestible for most Adult Swim viewers at the time. Nor did teenage me care for More Orel during season 2 or 3. I avoided it, and I'm sure that sentiment, which I wager was shared with the majority of Adult Swim viewers, was the reason why More Orel was hastily concluded. Oh, teenage Saberspark, little did you know that you would stop watching Family Guy and would eventually love More Orel.
Did I not say that you would be a burden? I have never been so wrong in all my life. I'm sorry I doubted you.
No, I would have doubted me too.
So, to the creators of More Orel, I tip my hat to you all for creating a show that was truly avant-garde and a trailblazer for adult animation. There is no denying that the adult animation genre is mostly known for family sitcoms that can be entertaining, but play it relatively safe, or at least did back in the 1990s and 2000s, especially for Fox. You can have bits of drama in your comedy, but it was exceptionally rare to see a comedy become a drama. Nowadays, it's more common to see more mature themes in adult animation, like BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, Tuca and Birdie, Has Been Hotel with its pilot, Hell of a Boss. And then you have shows that are like not comedies at all, like Primal. That's a drama exclusively. And we owe thanks to More Orel for being one of the first to tread that path. It tried, and by the mixed messages and hands of Adult Swim, it failed. Not that the show itself is bad, but that it was unceremoniously concluded. More Orel really was just before its time, but it absolutely cemented its legacy as a series that was not afraid to discuss dark and mature themes in a serious but sincere way. And it did so almost a decade before mainstream audiences would have a change of heart. Now, is it possible for More Orel to return in any meaningful capacity? It's hard to say. Stranger things have happened, and sometimes cult followings can bring franchises back to life. I mean, Hocus Pocus got a sequel. You know what? That's a bad example. The show creators and previous production members still talk about the series on their social media and remember it fondly. But any confirmation of continuing the series or a reboot or anything at all are rumors at best, and I'm okay with that. If Orel never returns at all, that is fine with me, because its legacy remains intact, and I much prefer that than the possibility of a sequel that could retroactively damage the series. I'm also looking at you, King of the Hill. So here's to you, Orel, a series that held its head high, took a leap of faith, and paved the way for adult animation. I was wrong about you, but I'm so glad that I finally arrived and can appreciate the beauty that you are as an adult.